Hey guys, so today's subject will be geopolitics in the Indian Ocean and South China Sea. We'll go over Iran's sanctions and trade deals with China later on, but for now, let's just talk a little bit about China. The world truly needs to see China as the new colonists. They're essentially in their colonial period akin to the Europeans in the 19th century. It's also worth noting that Chinese oil consumption is catching up to the United States. Basically, a growing middle class necessitates the increased consumption of oil. So the world's oil consumption will probably rise by around 50% by 2030, and almost half will be from India and China. So India will probably overtake Japan as the third largest importer of oil behind the US and China. And India will probably overtake China as the world's most populous country as well. So India is just growing their economy. They're definitely one of the fastest growing in the world. They're going to increase their coal imports from Mozambique, natural gas imports as well. So hopefully, the U.S. can increase its trade with India, especially in relations to natural gas. We became a net exporter of natural gas in 2017 under Trump. India increased their natural gas imports by 10% in 2019, so hopefully we can make some kind of deal there. But let's get back to Chinese oil consumption. Similar to the United States, China has its own oil fields. They used to be self-sufficient until the 1990s, but then it became a net importer. Most of their imported oil came from the Persian Gulf. They're actually the chief consumer there. So as a result, the Strait of Malacca near Malaysia is actually the busiest strait in the world. Most of, well, let's say 85% of Chinese-bound oil will pass through the Indian Ocean. So due to this congestion in the Strait of Malacca and the Indian Ocean, China has asserted itself in the region. In 2009, actually, the Chinese Navy established themselves in the Indian Ocean for the first time since the 1400s. China is essentially expanding vertically but downward towards the warm waters in the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. So they claim to be concerned about pirates, but they're somewhat correct in asserting this. But we do know that there are some ulterior motives. So when it comes to a naval presence in the Indian Ocean, the United States has the largest presence, followed by France, and then followed by China in third. China is quote-unquote supporting the global commons, or Earth's unknown natural space. Their strategy is to create a chain of man-made natural islands called the String of Pearls. These outposts are used as eavesdropping radar spots and ports of call for their ships. China vigorously denies that there's military motives to this, but satellite images have shown otherwise. They show that there's both civilian entities and military entities on these islands, so clearly they're dual use. As a result of all these efforts by China, the Indian Ocean is where rivalry between the U.S. and China and in the Pacific interlocks with regional rivalry between China and India. And it's also worth noting that China's fight against Islamic terrorism occurs there. So whenever the U.S. bombs Afghanistan, for example, it's from the Indian Ocean and the British-owned island of Diego Garcia, which is located right in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So any future bombings in the Middle East by the U.S. will have the same address in the Indian Ocean. So clearly it's a very important geopolitical area in the world. India is also increasing its influence horizontally in the region as well, from the Middle East to Southeast Asia. Trade with Iran and Iraq will also increase as a result as India booms and grows its middle class. So, India and Iran are actually more similar than they actually seem, with one, dominating the Middle East and the other dominating South Asia. Iran is also pretty crucial as it's a rear base to Pakistan. Obviously, India and Pakistan have had a strained relationship ever since the partition in 1949. I could talk about that in the Kashmir province in another video. But anyway, there is talk, though, of an Iran, Pakistan, India oil pipeline, but we'll see if that comes to fruition. This is where the U.S.'s attempt to isolate Iran kind of becomes untenable. We used to depend on divisions within Eurasia and now there's greater integration. So, there is some good news. Khomeini did urge Muslims in Kashmir to renounce their oppressors, which is a direct reference to the disputed territory's long history of Indian occupation. It is also worth noting that India used to buy a lot of oil from Iran as well. They used to be the second largest customer to Iran, but Trump's sanctions have changed that. By forcing India to cease purchasing Iranian oil, Trump actually masterfully pushed Iran into a corner. And India announced on May 23rd that they have ended all imports, according to their ambassador. So that's great news. We need to further work with India and China collectively and offer solid trade deals to them. Overall, it's important for the U.S. to play competing interests against one another as tensions heighten in the region. I mean, we all know the events that have happened over the past few months, but let's just go down the list. 4 oil tankers were sabotaged in the Gulf of Oman on May 13th. There was an attack on more oil vessels in June by Iran. The Iran Revolutionary Guard attempted an arrest of a British-flagged oil tanker, but they failed. The U.S. and Iran have been playing kind of like a cat-and-mouse game of shooting down drones. The Royal Marines also facilitated the bordering of a Iranian oil vessel on July 4th. There were actually 24 Indians found on board, and 4 of them are actually facing prosecution, including the captain. They shouldn't have been trying to sell oil to Syria. It's a direct violation of EU sanctions. So somewhat high tension time right now. It's also not uncommon for Indians to serve on Iranian merchant vessels, so it's not necessarily a defined act by the Indian government on Trump sanctions. It's more so just a case-by-case basis. It was a company based out of Mumbai, so we never know with these kind of things. But anyway, these just all point to a protracted problem that could probably get worse before it gets better. So, Iranian's oil exports have dropped in July, though. So it's right now at 100,000 barrels per day. Typically, they could be exporting around 225,000 to 400,000 gallons per day. Or no, barrels, sorry, excuse me. Iran really stopped reporting its production figures to OPEC. So it's kind of hard to tell, but it's actually good news for us that they're not working with OPEC as much anymore. Anytime their relationship's strained with the group, it helps us. And anytime Iran looks bad, it's good for the United States. However, Iranian tankers are actually offloading millions of barrels of oil in China. This is known as bonded storage. Although it remains out of circulation, its presence alone is kind of looming over the market. The storage of oil has potential to push global prices down if Chinese refiners decide to draw on it and use it. So it also allows Iran to keep pumping and move oil near, it allows the Iranians to keep pumping oil and then keep it close to their potential buyers. So technically the oil is still in transit, but it's not in violation of sanctions, quote unquote. China's been silent on this, which is not a good sign. Any further escalation of U.S. tariffs could encourage Iranian and Chinese cooperation. So we need to really get a trade deal done with China and coerce them to work against Iran. So it's really important that Trump gets something done in the next few weeks or months. I'm just looking forward to any new developments in the area, and I'll be sure to update you guys on whatever happens next. And I really hope this video helped you understand the great game in the region that's being played out in front of us. People don't really talk about what's going on in that region, and I think it's some of the most important stuff that's occurring today. So thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys on the next one.